Hello and welcome to the AdNote podcast, the podcast for the Adelaide.net user group. I'm your host, David Gardiner. This is a recording from our February 2026 meeting. Our favourite parts of .NET 10 with three speakers, David Gardiner, Ryan Rowston and Mark Foreman. And now over to the presentation.
Alright, hi everyone, my name's David, so I'm one of three presenters tonight. So we're really talking about what is new in .NET 10. So .NET 10 came out in November last year, and so we had other things on that month. So we thought let's focus this month on a bit of our highlights of .NET 10. But there's way more than what we can cover in our time tonight. And I guess the other thing to mention is there's actually another group meeting here right after us tonight. So we're a bit time constrained. So we're really going to try and stick to our schedule, and we kind of have to be done by 7 p.m. So hence we can't spend a lot of time digging in deep into some of the features as much as we'd like to. Simon?
But also, if people are interested in Linux and have a spare $3, they can stick around and do the other user group.
Yeah, that's right. We discovered that yes, the Linux user group is the other group that's meeting here after us. So,
which backgrounds on Linux as well.
It does. So yeah, no problems with hanging around for that if you want. Otherwise, we're going to head off to the pub and catch up there as well. So this is a bit of an outline of what we're going to cover, and yeah, let's dive into it. So quick mention that .NET 10 is a long-term support release, which means you get 3 years of support for that release. So there's a new release every November. So this year in November there'll be another release. That'll be not an LTS release, an STS release, which is standard term support. So that gets 2 years. It used to be less than 2 years, but they've increased that. But LTS is 3 years. So a lot of places will go, I just want to stick with the LTS, so I might be on .NET 8, and then I'm going to upgrade to .NET 10, and I'll wait for .NET 12. But honestly, with 2 years for STS, you might as well just try and keep upgrading. It just means less pain, like just smaller changes rather than big ones. On the .NET Runtime side of things, it's just faster. The JIT compiler, which takes the intermediate language and turns it into native code, is getting better at doing that on the different architectures. So stuff like loops and arrays and inlining stuff better than it used to. So just upgrading and running on new runtime is likely going to make your application run faster. Also, being smarter about do we allocate objects on the stack or on the heap? If it's on the heap, then the garbage collector has to look after it. If it's on the stack, then it doesn't. So again, less work for the garbage collector means faster application usually. So if you want to some good bedtime reading, Stephen Taub has produced this blog post which I looked at, and if I wanted to print it out, it was 238 A4 pages long of nitty-gritty details of all the little tiny performance improvements all the way through the runtime and the libraries as well for .NET. So yeah, I must confess I haven't read it from end to end, but it's got all the benchmarks. Here's what it was like previously, and now in .NET 10 here's how it's better. So a lot of details there. For the libraries, a lot of changes across the board. So we're going to skim through these, and I've just picked out a few things that I think are kind of interesting to me. Hopefully they're interesting to you as well. So in cryptography, we've now got some post-quantum cryptographic algorithms. So I'm sure we're all concerned that the quantum computer that you can buy from the corner store is going to break all your encryption. Maybe not quite yet, but soon, maybe. Anyway, so there's post-quantum cryptography, which is supposed to try and mitigate that, and so we've got 3 algorithms now in the framework to support that. A lot of them are experimental just because the algorithms themselves are still being finalised. So you can use them, you'll just need to deal with an experimental attribute to acknowledge that you're poking with stuff that's not quite finished. Globalisation, I think that's a funny thing in the title there, but you might not understand that. We've got support for date only in ISO week, and this is pretty cool. We've got numeric ordering for string comparison. So previously if you wanted to order those strings, Windows 8, Windows 10, Windows 11, it would have done it just like sort of how you would normally sort with ASCII. Whereas now, with this kind of sorting, it will sort Windows 8 and then Windows 10 and Windows 11 because it understands that 8, 10 and 11 are numbers rather than just letters. So it could be useful if you're dealing with stuff that's got numbers in it and all sort like that.
That's the Windows Explorer sort order.
Okay. Right. There we go. Diagnostics, they continue to improve support for open telemetry, and so they're sort of improving the alignment with the specification for open telemetry. You can add in schemas now for activity source and meter types. If you're using open telemetry, that might mean something to you. Zip files. Who's used a zip file before? You probably used it, you didn't even realise it. So we've got support for dealing with zip files in .NET. So we've now got better performance for that with a zip archive class. It just runs faster, more efficient with memory. Previously it would load everything into memory. Now it sort of streams stuff through. Plus they've got async APIs, so we can do things asynchronously with that class as well now, which is nice. Mac users, a few, yeah. So previously, I think you couldn't use TLS 1.3 on a Mac with .NET 9. Now you can. You do have to opt into it, and it may break some other things. So don't just blindly turn it on, test it out. Because they're using Apple's network stack to do that, so that may break some other things like older TLS versions. So, but it's there now, which is good. And .NET SDK. So we've got some new tooling here on the command line. We've got improved command order. So if you've used .NET from the command line, you might have noticed that sometimes it would be like .NET add package name or add project, but then it might be .NET project something. So it's a little bit inconsistent with where the different bits were on the command line. So they've gone through and they've now made it consistent. You can still use the old way of doing it, so you won't break stuff, but going forward, it's going to make more sense across all the different commands, which is nice. We've got command line completion now. I'll give this a try. I'm going to have to go like that. And so if I type in .NET, actually it's down the bottom, isn't it? Is that better? Then if I tab, all it's doing is tabbing through the files in that directory. Not so useful. Wouldn't it be nice if I could have tab completion there? Well, yes it would. So we now got .NET completions, and depending on what shell you're using, so I'm using PowerShell, I can now run that. And so now, if I do tab, it's tabbing through all the different parameters, and so I could do .NET format, and then space, and then what's available for that. There you go. So I can include that in my PowerShell in my profile, or in your Bash RC or profile on Linux, and getting tab completion. Oh, kind of nice. And okay, yeah. So if you've used front-end frameworks, you might be familiar with Node's npx command. So you can just run stuff. It'll just pull something down and run it immediately. So we've had .NET tools, we've had global tools and local tools, but you had to install them first and then you could run them. Whereas now we can actually just point it at a NuGet package and run it straight away. So I can do .NET tool exec. And so the .NET say is a NuGet package. If I looked up on nuget.org, there'll be a package with that name. I just type that in, and it's going to see, have I got this locally? If I have, then I'll run it. And oh dear.
No internet?
Yes, no internet. Okay, if I had the internet, that would have worked. That's kind of unfortunate. I don't know why. Let's not worry about that. You can also shorten that to DNX, and there's probably a way to say just use the one you've already got, but we won't worry about that. But yeah, so this is a nice way of just being able to invoke a .NET tool straight off the command line without having to install it first or installing as a global tool. So that's kind of nice. Sorry?
Those are sometimes very long.
Yeah, potentially .NET EF migrations. Sometimes you do want to use a specific version though. Like Entity Framework is one where you probably want to use the same version of the tool as the EF stuff that you're using. So that's what I lean more towards, using a local tool so you can commit that file. But, yeah. Support for the Microsoft testing platform with .NET Test. So that's a new way of running unit tests, and so you can use that with .NET Test now. So the newer versions of things like XUnit and MS Test, you can opt into using that testing framework. The old way of running tests was a bit more like the VS Test kind of infrastructure. So I think this is just like a better way of running unit tests. And with that, I'm now going to hand over to Ryan and switch video cables to talk about file-based apps.
All right. I might sit down a little bit for this one because I'm going to go very demo heavy. So one of the other new features in Net 10 was file-based apps. So previously you'd have to create a CSproj file and then have that be the thing that you target .NET against to run any code. What you can now do is you can just create a file with no CSproj or anything like that to back it up. Can everyone read that okay? I'll go and zoom in. I'll zoom in one level. Let me know if you're having trouble seeing it. And so I've created a really complex file-based app here that does the hello world, essentially. So hello world CS. And what I can do is, if I'm being very verbose, you can use .NET run --file command to run a file-based app. Sometimes you need that if you have your file-based app named something that is a reserved word or a command or something like that. But most of the time you can use the shorthand of .NET and then the file that you want to run. So a C# file. And what it'll do is it'll go and build that. It builds that stuff into a temp directory by default. And so being a temp directory under the hood, and then runs that. You can also then do any other regular .NET CLI style commands, well, most of them at least. So you can do just a build, you can do just a restore on an app, and that will do the build and restore. Again, it'll build to the temp, so if you want to actually see your results, just specify your output location, and so I can see that it built my hello world exe in this .out directory.
Does it build every time, or will it remember?
It'll cache builds if there's no differences. So if I quickly go and just .NET that, you'll see it does a quick build, and it's much faster than it was the first time.
Would that be, so if there are packages that are not part of that, we can run it, right?
Aha! Well, there are 4 directives currently supported in file-based apps, and these are ways of accessing things that you would normally need to use the CSproj to be able to set. One of them is the SDK, so you can choose the SDK specific that you're doing. So if you want to make a web API using a file-based app, for instance, you can use the web SDK. There are packages. Packages is how you add in things like NuGet packages to your file-based apps. There are properties. That's how you overwrite properties in your CSproj file. So you can set whatever property you want to set via the property directive. And project. So if you need to include another project of yours, like you have a CSproj somewhere, you can use the project directive to do that. So suppose I've got a more complex example here. We want to make a little API, hello API. So here, we're going to use the web SDK. I'm going to use the OpenAPI package and scalar for being able to actually see my API. And I can set properties in the CSproj file. And so I'm just saying framework Net 10, and I'm going to turn publish AOT off. This is the trap particularly if you're using anything on the web. By default, and you can see this if you can see this when you convert the projects. You can convert the project just to a CS proj. Let me just convert this one. Hello world. Oh, I didn't delete it from when I was testing this. Cool. And so you can see in the CS proj, there's some defaults set for file-based apps, and AOT is one of them. That will cause issues unless you have specific JSON parsing directives already set. So that's one that you might want to watch out for, a bit of a trap for new players if you want to start using APIs like this. But you can override those directives using the property flag. And in this particular example, I have a classes project with some data classes to help show you that, yes, I can link in a project to get my demo class. And then I can, from that, go about my day. I can use my usual using commands, using my Microsoft, using demo classes. And with all this, I can run an API. It to build it. Let me just quickly open my API reference, and I can indeed go and see, yes, my Hello API does work. And I mentioned this briefly to show the default of the AOT, but you can convert the projects, and so if you do this, you can then, I need to get better at clearing out my directories. You can then see what that is actually producing, and if you're building up a project like this and it's getting too involved, you can then just transfer it back to the CS proj. Other tricks on this? Cool. The other thing I wanted to highlight is validation. So there's some inbuilt native validation that you can use now with the minimal web APIs, which is what this is, and also in Blazor forms. And so you can actually have your data classes that then will be validated on the endpoints automatically. The trick is you've got to add the builder services, add validation, and that will add the validation into your apps. All right. This does work on minimal APIs and Blazor. I have not tested Blazor myself, but in theory it'll work. The main difference between this and the old versions of this is this will do deep validation. And so this will apply validation for, let's look at my endpoint where I have my data. I have a data model, then has subdata, which then has subdata again. And this will apply validation all the way down that tree. So let me just boot up my API again. There we go.
So the validation is those attributes?
Yes. So then you can use any validation attribute to actually apply validation rules. So common ones are things like string length, min length, max length, range for numbers. You can use regular expressions, things like that. And all of these, under the hood, are going to be, you can't see these two things, validation attributes. And so this will apply to any validation attributes that you can attach to things. So you can make custom ones as well. Not tested, not sure how well that'll integrate, but in theory, you can make custom ones. So I'll just quickly demonstrate that. Let me just go back to my validate endpoint, and I've got a pre-done JSON that is valid, and you can see that it's accepted. But if I break a rule, so this one, for instance, has limited 5 characters, I get my validation rules out, which is a really nice, clean, and easy way of getting a validation, and that then allows it to be in sync with things like Razor projects, which use this style of validation against their models. Now, trap here. This will use a fairly nice looking format for validation errors that are detected during the model validation. However, there's actually 3 different types of errors that it'll kind of throw depending on what type of bad request it is. If I hit a validation attribute that is, let me find you an endpoint, on the controller interface itself, So here we have a path that has a validation attribute, a query attribute with a validation, and the body data. That'll throw a different error. So if I just leave the JSON blank here, we'll see we still get a bad request, but now it's actually just an exception outright, and we get a different format, and so parsing that's going to be not ideal. You get a similar problem if you were to validate path test. There you go. Cool, still have my data in there. If I was to put an invalid query thing, you would get the same sort of error. The query needs to be there, and that actually did validate correctly. But if it's missing, like a required attribute, you'll get a bad HTTP request exception. And so you can get a bunch of different types of error. If I put invalid JSON in here, you'd get, and I fix this, you get JSON exceptions. And so those are a whole bunch of things. This does play nice with a feature that was actually added in Net 8. And you can actually use the add problem details. So this is based on the problem details format, which is an RFC-defined format for essentially bad request responses. And if I go and apply this to my API, wait for it to build and reboot. Now I get a consistent format for all of these types of errors. So that is another useful little trick that integrates with this validation quite nicely. And I get my regular validation errors. Cool. What else? A few other notes. Yes, I have time for a couple of quick notes here. This does, in theory, work with source generators for the source generator version of validation. And so that's useful, particularly if you're using a lot of regex validators. Being able to build up a source generator is a lot faster than having it manually process it. But that needs the validatable type attribute to be applied to your data class, and that is still experimental. And so could change, subject to change, and is still kind of in preview. You'll need to deal with your experimental errors if you want to use that. You can customize the validation and add extra resolvers and things like that, so you can apply third-party specific business rules when you're adding your validations. Again, this is also experimental at this stage. Also, finally, problem details. This one, because this is at an 8, the customization for this is not experimental anymore. And so you can actually customize problem details and add specific handlers. If there's sensitive data you want to make sure you strip out from certain types of problems, this would be a way of handling that scenario as well. So you can customize your problem details, add a particular context handler, and you can imagine switching on different types of problem details exceptions or scanning it for particular pieces of information that should be hidden. All right, I think that's enough to go off with these two features.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. And let me know if you want to see more of these there. I found them quite interesting.
Okay, so that was file-based apps and some validation. That's good. So Maui, anyone use Maui? Wow, okay. Talk to them afterwards to ask them why they use Maui. But yeah, so there's a stack of changes there. It was just too many to really dig into too much. But one was a source generator for XAML. Simplifying the namespace. If you've ever used XAML, it's like the first screen is just including namespaces, which is kind of annoying. So they've made a way to basically sort of make that a lot simpler now with global namespaces. And
With a few exceptions that it doesn't work for.
oh, there you go. And Core CLR on Android. So currently and previously, if you were building an app to run on Android, it was using the mono runtime. Now there's experimental support for using the Core CLR runtime on Android. So I would expect that probably runs faster, but I've got no idea. But yeah, that's kind of interesting to see them do that. WinForms. I'm just going to jump back so I can see what I'm doing. There we go. And, sorry. There we go. Who uses WinForms? It's okay, you can admit it, it's alright. Sometimes when you want to build a quick little GUI app for Windows, then WinForms is just like your go-to option because it's pretty simple. And they are actually making improvements there. So they've rewritten the clipboard API. And there's a reason for that because it's now sharing its implementation with WPF, which we'll see in a minute. You can do async forms. There's support for dark mode. There's obviously bug fixes. Some better support for screen readers, as well as a screen capture mode API. Now, if you're familiar with Windows 11 and some of the controversy about new features there, you might realise probably what this relates to, which is the ability to tell Windows, do not capture my screen of my application. So you've now got an API to be able to control that, so that if someone's using a screen recorder, then that API should stop them from recording your application. Maybe. Won't stop someone getting a phone and taking a photo of it, but yeah. WPF. Anyone building WPF desktop applications? No? Okay, we'll make it real quick then. It's faster, and the same clipboard changes in WinForms are now in WPF. The thinking there is that often when you're building apps, you might actually have a combination of WinForms and WPF, so by using the same implementation for the clipboard stuff, they can share that. And bug fixes too. ASP.NET. Anyone using ASP.NET? A few more hands. There we go. All right. So lots of changes here, particularly in the Blazor space. That seems to be where a lot of the attention is. And I guess it's interesting from outside watching where are all the changes happening, where are Microsoft investing their resources of their money and their staff in making changes. And so yeah, Blazor again seems to be one that they're investing in. Let's drill through some of these quickly. So Blazor, you can now do a static web asset for your Blazor script. We've got streaming enabled for default, client-side fingerprinting. So I think that relates to releasing a new version, and does it need to reload stuff or not? I think that's what it looked like to me anyway. I'm not a Blazor expert, so all those people doing Blazor stuff might make more sense to them. JavaScript bundle support. So if you're building a Blazor application, previously you just had to ship it, but now I think you can integrate it with a JavaScript bundler like Vite or Webpack or some of those kind of tools. Again, I've not tried it, but and hot reload for WebAssembly, which is always nice if you're debugging an application with hot reload, just seeing those changes live, which is pretty cool. Minimal APIs. So I think you were demoing some of this stuff already.
Yes, minimal API.
Yeah. And so now if there's an empty string, that can be treated as a null. If it's a null value type. We saw a demo of the validation support there. And also server-sent events. Anyone heard of those before? I hadn't. It was quite interesting. I went and dug in, and it's like a W3C standard for basically being able to send stuff from the server back to the browser. Yeah, and it's using HTTP2, like having an open channel, so that you can just send stuff back to you. So yeah, and so there's support for that in minimal APIs now. Open API. So if we want to create specifications for our APIs, then open APIs often the way we want to do that. And now we've got support for 3.1, but be aware that even though it's 3.1 as opposed to 3 or 2 point something, there is breaking changes in that implementation. So don't just blindly go, yes, I want the new version. Opt in and understand the impact of that, because the specification has got changes in it as well. You can generate YAML, so not just JSON now as well. And we can add in descriptions, and we can also use our XML dot comments to use and import that into your open API. So you don't have to necessarily have, I guess, description attributes or separate stuff. You can now just have your comments in the one place in your code, and then that'll get included into your open API. On the auth side of things, we've got metrics added, so we can get a better idea of what's going on with our authentication and authorization. Identity have also got metrics added as well. And avoiding cookie login to redirects. So if you're an application and you're trying to hit an API, you probably don't want to be redirected to a login page, because you're probably using a token or some kind of secret to log in. So basically saying that if you're an app, don't try and redirect me somewhere that I'm not going to be able to fill in a web page, because I'm not a person. So we've now got the ability to set that as well. And .localhost. Anyone familiar with .localhost domains? I'd started seeing them when I was playing around with some of the Aspire stuff, but this is now supported in .NET 10. And what it means is, you're all familiar with localhost as a name for your local machine. But now we can have .localhost as a top-level domain, which also resolves to your machine. The nice thing about that is you can have like web server.localhost, database.localhost, redis.localhost, and they're different fully qualified domain names, but they all resolve to your machine. So .NET 10 understands that, and when it resolves those names, they'll resolve back to your machine. But yeah, I guess if you're using things like Docker, Compose, or Aspire, or those kind of things where you want to have different names for different services, but they all actually are running on your machine rather than having multiple machines, there's support for that, which is cool. C# 14, okay, here we go. Bunch of new features there. I'm going to pick out 3 that I thought were more likely to be useful every day. The file-based apps, we've already seen Ryan demonstrate some of the pre-processor directives, so we don't have to. That doesn't count in my top 3. So first off, extension members. So we've had extension methods since, I don't know, was it C# 4? Basically when Link was introduced. So we've had extension methods, but what we couldn't do was create extension properties or extensions of a type rather than an instance. So now we can do that. So it's kind of small, but here's an example of using the new keyword. I've got a pointer here. The extension keyword, and so the first block of code here is demonstrating a extension property and an extension method. So we could have implemented this with the old way of using a static class with a this parameter on the method. But we can now use this new extension keyword. But we can also extend the type. So you'll notice the difference between these two. The first one, we're extending an instance, so we do have a source there. But the second one, all we've got is a type. And then the syntax here. So basically, you'd be able to have the type name dot and an extension method on top of that. So yeah, I think that could be useful. Certainly in times past, there's been times when I thought, I wish I could have had an extension property, or I really wanted to have an extension method that was going to be on the class, not just on the instance. So I now can do that. I don't remember where I wanted to do that now. It was a while ago. But yeah, field keyword. So previously, we might have had code like this, where we've got a message property with a getter and a setter, and because we wanted to do some kind of validation or extra logic on one of those, we've had to introduce a backing field because that was our only choice. As soon as we added some code here, so in this case I'm making sure that when we set the value that it's not null. If it's null, we're going to throw an exception. Probably not a great idea to do on a property, but it's my example, I can do what I like. But anyway, in C# 14, we can simplify that to this. We've got the field keyword, and so we don't need that backing field. So the nice thing about that is A, less code. B, you don't run the risk of another method accessing that backing field accidentally. So we've got sort of better encapsulation, really. So yeah, I've started using this already with some code. So that's often an easy upgrade to go through your code base and just there's already support for upgrading that in the tool. And null conditional assignment. So we've had null conditional operators and already on the right hand side. So you can have like property.property.property, and if one of those parts of those was null, then you either have lots of ifs or you could use a question mark to say, if this is not null and this is not null, then I can set this. But we can now use it on the left-hand side. So previously we would have to check, is customer not null, then I can set the order property of customer. But now we can simplify that to customer question mark dot order. It's basically the same code. So again, just simplifying our code, I guess they call that sort of syntactic sugar because it's under the covers it's basically the same, but just means your code's got less curly braces and that kind of thing, which is nice. Okay, that were my favourite things about C# 14. Maybe you were really excited about one of the others. That's okay. I'm sure they've got their uses as well. People using Entity Framework. A few hands there. Yeah, so a few changes here. How are we going for time? Pretty good. Supporting some new stuff that's shipped in SQL Server and also for Cosmos DB as well. So let's have a look. So Azure SQL and SQL Server 2025, which is the latest version of SQL Server on-prem, has some support for new vector types. And you might think, why would I use that? But if you're doing any kind of AI or ML, then vector types probably make more sense to you. Likewise, we've now got first-class support for JSON types. So you can set a column in SQL as a JSON type rather than just a bar chart max. And we've also got custom constraint names. So previously, it was just SQL Server would just create constraint names if you had constraints in your EF called model. We can now define those, which is nice. So here's an example of a vector type in your core. So we've got the actual type there, and we have a SQL vector of type float. JSON. So we've got a type here, and so here's our model. It's a pretty simple model with a blog and a blog details, and you notice we've got our tags as an array, and our blog details is an object type here. If I do .toJSON in my model entity mapping there, then I end up with this kind of schema in SQL. So you'll see that my tags is a JSON type, and my details is also a JSON type. So the array is now going to be stored in a JSON column. Likewise, the details, rather than a separate child table or a whole bunch of extra columns, it's now just going to be stored in that JSON column. And SQL is efficient enough that you're not going to lose out too much as far as if you need to query some of those properties inside that JSON. It does that very efficiently. So here's our default constraint names. So we can now set our constraint name here, so df post create a date. And so if we went and had a look at SQL Server, we would see that there's that constraint with a name rather than some random thing that SQL came up with. So that makes it really much better if you're trying to do migrations and you want to drop a constraint. You can now match the name of that constraint rather than trying to find it. Cosmos DB. Anyone using Cosmos DB in Azure? A few hands. Don't really want to admit it. Okay. So you can use Entity Framework to talk to Cosmos DB. Kind of depends which model you've picked as to, because Cosmos you can choose different ways of accessing it. So there's the MongoDB view of Cosmos. But yeah, so EF Core is a way of accessing Cosmos DB. And so because Cosmos has added support for full text search and some also vector stuff and hybrid search, Cosmos supports that as well. So I'm just going to skip over this. But yeah, some of this relates again to AI and ML applications. So if you're doing those kind of things with Cosmos, this might be more useful. Hybrid search, these examples there. Okay, complex types. So we've got a map here and we've got complex properties. So we could do this already in EF Core. And so we've marked this as a complex property for the customer with a shipping address and a billing address. And that would create this kind of schema where we've got billing address, and postal code, street, that kind of thing. So now we can support optional types, which we didn't have the ability to do before. So I've got an optional type here to that question mark, so it could be null, and that's going to work. Likewise, we can now use JSON as well. So we kind of saw that a bit previously. So we can now, rather than generating all those extra columns, we'll just generate that simple thing with our shipping address as a JSON column, and all those other things will be properties inside that. We also have support for structs, which we didn't have before. So for simple things, and the address one is probably a good example here, where that could be a struct now rather than a full-on class. So just potentially a bit more efficient memories. SQL generation, EF Core is a bit better in generating queries for some things now than it used to be. So parameterized collections, we can do left or right joins now, which we couldn't do before. Improved for split queries. So here's the left-right join. So we've got a left join extension method there. There's also a right join one as well. So that will generate the kind of SQL you would expect with a left join or right join. Split query. So we've had as split query already, I think, since .NET 8. And so that will, rather than generating one really wide query, it'll generate two queries. One that will get the blogs and one that will get the posts. The problem was that previously the ordering wasn't always predictable. So now it's just added in this extra bit in the SQL it generates so that that inner order by is going to be predictable. So it just makes it a bit more reliable. And name query filters. So we've had previously the ability to add a query filter in EF Core so that a good example is soft deletes. So whenever you do a query, you always want to exclude records that have is deleted equals true. So if you've ever used a system with soft deletes, it's like a database. You have a column that says if it's ticked, then treat that record as being deleted. It's not. You didn't run delete. You just marked it as delete. And so then you want to make sure you don't ever return those rows. But what if you're an admin? Then you probably do want to be able to see those rows, or you want to have an undelete function. So we could do that once with one query, but now we can have named queries, so we can opt in to those. So they're going to be all on by default, but we can then, for a particular query, we could turn it off. So like a multi-tenant architecture is another example where you want to make sure always you're filtering by the tenant, except if you're an admin. If you're an admin, you want to see everything. So you might have an admin screen where you turn off the tenant filter. So we can do that now with named filters. There's an example of using one. Aspire, we're not going to talk about that tonight because we've got Justin coming in April to give us an update on where Aspire is at. We had Mitch do a talk on Aspire last year. Some of you might have been here for that. But things have been moving along rapidly. So much so that when I did a talk on Aspire for .NET Conf in November, it was already out of date between the week that I submitted the talk and when it got presented. Really great for distributed applications, and by that I mean any application that basically has a front end and a back end and maybe something else in between. And particularly for me, for being able to run those locally really easily. That's pretty cool. But yeah, come along in April and find out more from Justin. And yeah, I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Thank you, David. Hi. My name's Mark. I'm a developer at SA Power Networks, and currently I'm maintaining and building a system that's used by the electrical industry. We've got about 10,000 users. They in turn have about 100,000 customers that they service through the platform that I work on every year. And tonight I'm going to talk about how that system was taken from .NET 8 to .NET 10 in 80 minutes. I should mention the app at its core is an ASP.NET Core API. It's got REST and OData endpoints. And it was, surprisingly...
So Mark, can I just clarify, you transferred from .NET 8 to .NET 10 in 80 minutes, or this talk's going to go for 80?
If I talk for 80 minutes, then I've done the upgraded injustice. So, 1:43 p.m, I started with an embarrassingly dull Copilot prompt. Help me upgrade this project to .NET 10. Had the usual interruption, 2 hours worth of project meetings. Copilot was a little bit unhelpful getting it to compile some certificate code, so I had to read some documentation for that. But by 5:03 p.m, I'd done all my regression testing and committed to the repository. So what actually changed in my project? Well, not too much actually. So the framework version changed to .NET 10, and with that you get for free ASP.NET upgrades to version 10. You also get C# 14 for free. To get it compiling, I did have to upgrade one dependency and one line of code needed to be changed. But I didn't have to upgrade any other dependencies. I didn't have to change any configuration. And in fact, the overall process and change was so small, I can fit a pseudo diff on one slide. So you can see framework version changed. System text JSON actually comes out of the box in .NET 10, so didn't need to reference that anymore. There's my library upgrade, and there's a line of code that changed. The X509 certificate 2 constructor is now deprecated. So that went into a test environment, left it to soak for a couple of days and put it in production. And been running fine ever since. But then there's always a but. So 2 weeks later, I was trawling through the log files and I noticed that the log correlation for signal R was no more. Now we'll do a little side note on what's signal R, what's log correlation. So signal R is a really handy protocol and set of libraries from Microsoft that gives your web app real-time communication between the web browser and your back-end server. So I don't know if you can see down below, but your browser initiates the connection to the server. It's typically either WebSockets or long polling. And once that's set up, your browser can send messages to the server can send messages back to the browser in real time. And I'm using this for some real-time monitoring updates in the browser from some long-running back-end processes that need to show to the user. And the other thing, log correlation. So these screenshots are from App Insights, but it's correlation is not specific to App Insights. Essentially, if you are going searching for a particular log event and you find it, correlation gives you all the other logs and events that were inside that session. Now, what is a session? Could be anything you define. Typically, it's maybe like an end-to-end API call. So hopefully I've masked out all the sensitive stuff, but you can maybe see there's a whole bunch of different types of logs. There's the initial request. There's a couple of database dependencies. So these are the dependencies I'm not explicitly logging. That comes free with the logging framework. If there was a back-end API call to another system, that would show up there. And it gives you a full view of what actually went on with that one call. Very, very handy and magical to be able to do that. Getting back to the problem I ran into 2 weeks later, did my search, one log came up. Oh no, so correlation had disappeared. But only for signaler calls where the browser was calling the server. Every other type of API call was correlating fine. So actually, until yesterday, this last slide was going to be a call for help, but did manage to find, I don't know if I call it a fix or a workaround, but essentially setting up a logging session inside each of those hub or server calls. So it's literally that one line at the start of each server method that the browser is calling with signaler. It did take longer than 80 minutes to find this. So what didn't work for me was many chats with Copilot, even with the OpenAPI GPT 5.2, still not smart enough to fix this. I suspect maybe a combination of .NET 10 being quite new, not enough information out there. Plenty of Google searches. I could not find anyone else having this problem. I did not try upgrading the whole logging framework to OpenTelemetry. Why is that significant? Because, as David mentioned before, .NET 10 does introduce a whole bunch of new compatibility for OpenTelemetry. There's also some breaking changes that are noted as part of that. I suspect I'm the victim of some of those, but without spending much more time on this, that fix was working very nicely. So that's the end. That was my mostly painless upgrade from .NET 8 to .NET 10, and I wish you all the very best in your own upgrades to .NET 10. Thank you very much.